I'm waiting for the video to catch up here. For me, it's not about presuppositions, because I had that belief. I would have remained a Christian if I could still have enough to believe in. I didn't think there was still a thread of enough to grasp onto to believe in.
But we can also catch presuppositions like we can catch the measles. You know, you can have one presupposition and then it can be undermined by another presupposition. So we, you know, things can come in. You know, it's, you know, it depends what culture you're in and how, you know, if you're going to a university and you're listening to lecturers, you could catch the presuppositions without you realizing it. But the point is, what the issue is here, the important issue is, all I'm saying is that this issue about logic and the nature of logic exposes certain philosophical constructs within your presuppositions and mine, and it's about whether your presupposition matches the reality of what you're saying or what I'm saying.
Okay, let me tell you something. Have you heard of, there's a logical fallacy called confirmation bias? Do you know what that is?
I have, but you'll have to refresh me. I've just did a lot of logical fallacies today.
Yeah, so confirmation bias, it doesn't seem like a logical fallacy, because usually logical fallacies have to do with bad logic, but I've seen it listed as a logical fallacy. So basically, confirmation bias means you believe something, and then when you look at the evidence, you try to interpret it in light of what you believe.
Yeah.
And what you should do is try to look at evidence more impartially based on what makes the most facts. And when I was a Christian, my presupposition was I wanted to believe. I did not want to leave the faith. When I became an atheist, it was bad news for me. It was a depressing way to go, but I figured I had to pick the truth over what feels good. So I did not want to leave the faith. My presupposition was for Christianity, but I was open-minded and I wanted to follow the truth, and so I had to go against my presupposition at that point. And basically, I don't even like the word presupposition, because it sounds like the same thing as confirmation bias. This is a bad thing. Presuppositions are a bad thing in science and logic.
Well, I would disagree. I think you can't discuss the nature of evidence without discussing the nature of presuppositions. For example, if you look at the history of historical Jesus studies, Renan came to the life of Christ with his trying to be objective and scientific in his understanding of Christ. Strauss tried to do the same. Bultmann's tried to do the same, but Bultmann created a Jesus in his existential philosophy. Strauss created a Jesus in his German philosophy, and Renan created a Jesus out of his French philosophy. And so,
and then you had Muhammad, and then you also had Muhammad and Joseph Smith later making more Jesuses too.
Bernie, but the point is that they did what you're saying. They tried to look at it scientifically and objectively, but in the end, they created a Jesus out of their own image. So what I'm saying is, I totally agree with the historical Jesus studies. Data is important. I don't disagree with that. I don't discount that. And I know that you get frustrated when creationists maybe use presuppositional apologetics to get away from looking at the data. So I appreciate what you're saying there. But I think at a higher philosophical level, if you read books like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, where he's grappling with evidences and presuppositions, you'll find that you cannot get away from this issue of presuppositions. It's not a case of just confirmation bias. It's about looking at your presuppositions and seeing whether they comport to reality. And your presupposition that logic is immaterial does not comport with your naturalistic position, because you know that you believe that the brain is a material object, and how does that work within your position? And it's no good just saying it's all about confirmation bias, let's move on to data. But we can go on to another topic if you want. I think we've exhausted this one.
Well, it seems to me like you're mixing some things up too. When you talk about trying to prove logic, that's the thing is, like I said, we have a starting point. We agree about logic. We're not trying to disagree over whether logic is good or bad or how it works. We agree to basic logic. I personally think most of the problems with young Earth creationists, like Kent Hovind, for example, is he is scientifically naive. Like I asked him if he knew about fused human chromosome number 2, and then he said yes, and we talked about it, and then it became obvious he didn't know the argument. So, you know, he says there's no evidence for evolution, and I asked another apologist about this, and he said he wasn't really familiar with these arguments, and as far as I'm concerned, you're not really in apologetics. You're not even in the game until you understand the evidence for evolution. You cannot say there's no evidence for evolution without being aware of the evidence. And the evidence is really quite deep, and it's quite amazing, and it's out there. It's not like it's a hidden secret or something. There's tons of evidence out there on so many different levels, on DNA, on biodiversity. There's just so much science out there, and it's really true that in order to not understand to not accept that, you have to be naive, I think, scientifically.
But even if I granted you all that you say is correct, you would still undermine your position, because your position is rationality. You're trying to be rational. And if you're trying to be rational, you're doing science and presenting arguments and evidence and saying that there's a solid position here, but so I grant you your argument, and even if I grant you that argument, you still don't get there to where you want to go. And that is that you're using rationality, and that rationality cannot be explained in your worldview. So, well, okay, even if I granted you your argument, your own argument would implode on itself, because your argument is clear, logical arguments, yeah? So if I grant you that, it would actually implode upon yourself, because how do you get logic, how do you get rationality from nature, from natural selection and mutation, which is not rational? How does that comport with your position?
Okay, so just to back up a little bit, are we in agreement about the laws of logic, that they exist?
Yes.
Okay. So really the question is, where do the laws of logic come from, and does that require a designer? That's what your argument is, right?
No, my argument is that if you're positing rationality, how you want to frame it is up to you. What I'm saying is this: if you're positing a rationality, if you're positing a position for evolution, you are presenting evidence, you are presenting logical reason and arguments, right?
And we've already agreed on that.
Yeah, but that presumes the nature of reality is rational. And if that's
but we've already agreed on that point.
Yeah, wait a minute. But if that is the case, yeah, but what we've not agreed on is you've not given a rational position for why that nature of reality is rational, and that's the issue. And your worldview, can I just finish? Your worldview and your position assumes that it does not give any rationale for it. So what you're doing is it's still a jump of faith, or really what you're doing is you're undermining your position, because on the one hand you want your cake and eating it. You're saying here's it, reality is rational, we can get data for evolution, and I can show you rationally that this is correct. And yet at the same time your own position is irrational, in the sense that the mutation and natural selection, and then going before that abiogenesis, and then before that, whatever it is, a Big Bang or an infinite regress in the universe or whatever, string theory, whatever that is, none of that comports to any rational basis, because there is a lack of whereas in the Christian position, God is rational by nature, and so therefore, if the universe is made, and if we're made, then it explains why there is rationality, why we can have rationality. But without that personhood at the beginning of the equation, it seems impossible to connect the two, from a Big Bang to abiogenesis to natural selection and mutation to rationality. And that's the issue. It's not the evidence that you posit and the logic implodes upon itself because it is not able to give a foundation of rationality.
So basically, like I said, the whole point of your question is asking the question, what is the foundational basis of logic and reason? That's what you're trying to say, right?
Okay.
That's your whole question. And you're trying to say, I have no basis. And you're trying to say that you do have a basis because of your belief in God, right?
On presuppositions, yeah.
Okay, so that's a whole different discussion versus, I mean, that has nothing to do with evolution, because when we talk about evolution, we go forward and we say, okay, we agree to laws of logic and all that. Now let's look at the evidence.
No, it does, because if you read Alvin Plantinga, I think he's written a paper on this. He written a good paper where he says, if evolution is correct, it would actually implode upon itself. It would actually negate rationality. So I mean,
yeah, I know what he says, and he's totally goofy about this. He's basically saying that he's saying by definition, evolution is for basically survival of the fittest. It's about filling an ecological niche. It is not about determining truth. And so there's no reason to believe in evolution that humans would evolve to determine truth, which I think is a really silly argument, because evolution is really an arms battle, and the development of the mind is part of that. And in this struggle for survival, we have to develop our mind, and that involves developing truth, because science, for example, gives us the best weapons, like nuclear technology, and nuclear technology is hardcore science. So to me, it's very obvious that evolution does, I mean, our brain power and truth seeking does help evolution.
But
it's just kind of a silly argument from him.
It's not a silly argument. You're actually negating what you're saying. If you say Dr. Meyer, I think it was Meyer, who died a couple of years ago, he's a world authority on evolution. He said that evolution is a historical science, in the sense that we have to go back and look at history. If you look at Francis Ayala, who's a philosopher and a biologist, and he talked about in the 1950s where the PhD students in biology were told not to use the word words like design or purpose in talking about biological structures, because they didn't want to give a sense about history had meaning or history had purpose, because after 1950s they were sick and tired of these historical meta-narratives, and evolution itself is a historical meta-narrative. I
agree with that. Yeah, I agree that evolution is a good alternative origin story.
So it's a view of history, an understanding of history, and in that understanding of history, what you don't seem to realize is you're imploding on yourself every time you use an argument against me for the existence